Council and members of the public. Welcome to the Planning Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies. We have some apologies today, I think. Apologies? No one?
We've had apologies from Councillors Sparling, Councillor Ball and Councillor Fletcher.
Right. Okay. I think we were expecting Councillor Fry, weren't we? But
I just had a message he'll be back to 3.
right. Okay. I think Kate Taylor, we're welcoming you back, I think, to the committee. Nice to see you here again. Okay. And that brings us on to declaration of interest. Any declarations? Nope. Item 3, minutes of the last, they've been circulated. Is it your wish that I sign these as a true record? Sam? Davey, Councillor Davey.
Yes, I think it's the item on the Speedway. It's got me down as abstaining. If I remember correctly, I voted against the deferral. I tried to check it, but there's no online sort of view of me saying.
Right.
But I definitely remember voting against the deferral as opposed to abstaining.
Do we take that as a correction then, do we? Or how does that?
I'd have to check the webcast and Lynn's notes.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We'll try and get it rectified if at all possible. Okay. Chair's urgent business. I've been notified of none. All I would say that I'm sure members will be aware that we're about to embark on the first meeting with the electronic voting. I wish to formally move that we adopt this process for this meeting and all the rest of our planning meetings. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Item 5 is questions from members of the public.
We've had no questions.
We have
Chair.
none? Oh, no. Okay. I should interject to say that before we take a vote, I will outline again, for the avoidance of doubt, the procedure just before we embark on the actual vote today. Item 6, planning applications for consideration. 6.1, Northwest Quadrant, Derriford Road, Plymouth, and that is John Douglas is going to present that to us. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. An honour to be the first to use this system in public. Let me get the presentation up. Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? So this application before you, the application site is part of a large landholding known as Northwest Quadrant. And this proposal is the first phase of a larger mixed-use development which officers are discussing with the applicant through pre-application discussions that are ongoing. So the Northwest Quadrant site was sold by the hospital in 2011, I understand, and it extends from the boundary with the hospital here along Hospital Drive, including the application site. It extends to Derriford Roundabout, which is here, but it doesn't include this land here, which is the ambulance station owned by the Ambulance Trust, or the land here, which is an office building referred to as the Norwich Union Building, or Eagle One, owned by Lone Eagle Properties. But staff from the hospital do work in this building, and part of the office part of the proposal that's before members today is intended to accommodate those staff who are due to vacate that building before 2021. The wider site also includes a large area of car parking here, which is known as Car Park E, which is used as staff car parking for the hospital. And the purpose of the multi-storey car park before you today is to effectively accommodate those cars to free up this site for development as a later phase. And the site extends further north, and you can see on this slide up to the boundary with Derriford Road. and there's a building called the Rowans, which has recently been refurbished and put back into health use. The wider site also includes the existing multi-storey car park known as Bircham Park or Car Park 1 in your reports. And that contains offices and retail units as well as 610 car parking spaces for staff and visitor use. That car park was opened in 2014 and it's also owned by Aviva and it's leased to the Hospital Trust. And as a point of interest, the designer, the architect of that building is the architect for the scheme that's before you today, so give you some assurances on quality. So the site does have a significant planning history. In 2009, it was subject to an application for a major retail-led mixed-use development. At the time, the local planning authority, considering that proposal against their strategy and the core strategy to introduce a district centre for Derriford, felt that the scheme wasn't capable of delivering that strategic function. So that application was refused, and that led to a major public inquiry. And at that public inquiry, the refusal by the council was upheld, so the appeal was dismissed in 2013. After this appeal, the site was sold to the current owners of Aviva, so it's now in separate ownership, and they're now proposing site-wide regeneration, which is more focused on healthcare alongside commercial and residential uses. So before I explain the proposal in more detail, I just want to give you a little bit of policy context, particularly given that we have a newly emerging policy context in the form of the joint local plan. And this diagram you can see on the screen is the vision diagram for this particular area. The site is shown there with a red ring in the middle. I won't go into detail, but ultimately the strategic objective for this area as a whole is to realise its potential as a regionally significant growth hub through introducing new development which supports and consolidates existing facilities to create a vibrant mixed-use heart for the north of Plymouth. And this new heart is to be centred around a new mixed-use commercial centre which complements rather than competes with the city centre. So this is relevant to the proposal before you today because, as you can see on the diagram in the left there, the draft site allocation for the proposed new commercial centre, shown in blue with reference PRY 38, does include the site before members today. As you can see, it also includes the Norwich Union office building that I spoke about, which is here, Derriford Business Park, and the former Seaton Barracks site here, which is in council ownership. So on the right-hand side here is an extract from our emerging joint local plan, which is a strategic master plan framework for this area. The thing that's most relevant on that diagram to what's in front of you today is this long dotted orange route here, which is the vision for this area is that this is created as a new public realm, a high-quality public realm route, so ultimately a walking and cycling route. It may have cars on it in places, but it's designed to tie the two parts of this commercial centre together and enable it to function as one. And that's become known as the Seaton Arc, and it passes the application site directly at this point here, which is why it's of relevance to this proposal. So turning to the development itself, just briefly to talk about the wider development and the master plan before I get to the detail of this application. This is, well, as I said, Aviva acquired the site in 2015, and the pre-app on the site-wide development started in 2016. And this is the evolving master plan as it stands with the submission of this application. We have been looking at the master plan through the pre-app, but the developer's preference at this stage has been to submit individual applications for the early phases with an outline application to follow. So the current application, which you can see with the red line at the bottom here, which I'll explain in a second, is ultimately the first phase of this wider development. We've also recently received, although it's not yet been validated, we've received an application for this as the next phase of the development, which is a planned care centre, ultimately a new hospital for non-acute hospital functions. So the proposal that's before members on this part of the site at the bottom here is for a 600-space multi-storey car park, which is this part here, for sole use of staff of the Hospital Trust. and an office building of around 4,700 square metres, which is also intended for staff use for the hospital, mainly staff being relocated from the building over there that I mentioned. And I mentioned the public realm route, the Seaton Arc. This plan just shows how this scheme relates to that proposal. The key function of it is to try and link the public transport interchange and the entrance to the hospital and create this direct link across here through down to the Seaton Barracks site. And you can see here that it passes the building immediately. To make sure that the route is attractive to pedestrians at this point, the scheme includes a retail unit on the north side of the car park, and the main entrances to the office and the car park also face onto it. So these elevations show you the proposals in context. If we look at the lower image, firstly, you can see this is the view from that Seaton Arc route from the street to the north of these buildings. This is the existing car park, and in here you can see it has a number of retail units. There's a Pizza Hut, a Subway and a Costa Coffee in there, and one vacant unit at the moment. This is where the linear park that comes up from Morley Drive emerges at this street. This is the office building with a glazed entrance foyer at this point here. This is the entrance to the podium, and so if you walk into this space, from there you can gain access on foot into the car park, or also into the offices. There's a small retail unit in the car park here, and then the vehicle entrance to the car park is at this point here. And in the other elevation is looking from Morley Drive back up at the scheme. So this is the new car park. This is the podium I mentioned. You can see the routes from Morley Drive up to that level. This is the new office, and that's the existing car park. So looking at that in plan view briefly, you can see the car park here on the left, with the access in here and the retail unit here. This is the podium space that gives access on foot to the car park and to the office. You can see there's also a gap underneath the office here, which allows you to walk out the car park, across the podium, effectively underneath the office and across a bridge to the existing car park, which has got an existing raised terrace running down this side, and also some shop units down this side. And that's running over the top of this sort of ravine garden that leads up from Morley Drive. That's looking east from the existing car park at the new office building. And you can see, the critical thing you can see the gap there and the bridge where you can walk across. The main thing to note is the difference in level, really, with the street at the front, known as Roscoff and Campus Lane, being around a storey higher than Morley Drive, which is down at the bottom. The office starts on the ground floor level here. The area below the office is predominantly used as a cycle parking facility with 110 cycle parking spaces in there, as well as showers and plant and so on. Here's some 3D views, again looking from the existing car park. You can see the office in the foreground there, with the new car park behind. This is the Plymouth Pear Tree, which I'll talk about more in a second. Similar view here, looking across from the car park again, across the bridge, under the space, underneath the office, through to the car park. And this view of the scheme is from the north. So you can see the existing car park on the left. This is the sort of ravine garden that goes down here. In terms of materials, the office is in an aluminium cladding system. With the aluminium cladding panels are openable to provide, some of them to provide ventilation, and it's got fixed glazing in between. The car park here, you can see the exposed structure with timber logs, which are designed to screen the cars, and they're sort of denser lower down to give more screening and sort of fade out higher up. This is views of the scheme from outside the hospital and from the public transport interchange, so designed to show you how you'd be led towards and down this the Seaton Arc, this public realm route. I mean, you can see in here that the office is clearly taller than the existing car park, but it sits, we think it sits very comfortably in those views. And similarly, in the views from, as you're travelling towards the hospital down Morley Drive, we think the scale, the office here is fine at 6 stories. In fact, officers have no concerns whatsoever about the design. We propose conditions as usual to control materials, including the cladding and so on, but there's no concerns at all in that respect. So just wanted to talk briefly about the 2 key issues. We have received 9 objections to the application, and they mainly focus on those 2 key issues. Those are the impact on trees on the site and access, car parking, vehicle circulation issues. So I'll talk a little bit about each, starting with the trees. The trees across the wider site are protected by a tree preservation order. That's ultimately in place to ensure that trees can't be cut down in advance of planning applications, so that we retain the control to consider the impact of each individual development on trees. The Plymouth pear that I mentioned also has additional protection because of its rarity. And this plan here shows you how the Plymouth pear is to be protected, and also how the 3 lime trees in the wooded area, that's ultimately part of the next phase, but how they're going to be protected from the new footway that goes down the side. However, it also shows on this plan, and most significantly, the tree loss involved 2 Category A trees, which are here at the north side of the site. There's also a hedgerow. It's fairly significant to be lost through here, but these are the 2 key trees which are the majority of concern in respect to this application. In terms of justification for that, we've asked the developer to demonstrate and to look at whether they could keep them and integrate those into the master plan ultimately, and they produced 2 diagrams which I think show quite well why they can't be kept. I mean, this one shows that if you took the route, this direct legible route that we're seeking to achieve, if you took that to the north, it would clearly not be very direct at all any longer. And if you moved the building, if you took the route to the south, that would involve cutting the building back quite significantly. And both those options would also involve moving the next phase of the development, which may impact on other trees in this area here. So, and of course, the building can't be moved any further south because the Plymouth pear tree is in this location here. And as you can see on this slide, this is the Plymouth pear. The building has purposefully been moved a little bit further away than it absolutely needs to from that tree in order to give it the space that it needs to grow. Sorry, before I talk about that, in terms of the justification for tree loss that's set out by the applicant, officers do accept this, subject to compensatory tree planting, and 51 new trees are proposed just as part of the red line of the application, which is this smaller area here. As part of our this application and as part of our wider discussions on the site, the developers also submitted this plan, which sets out their aspirations across the wider site to introduce a significant number of new trees. This can't ultimately be fully secured through this application because we'd be predetermining the location of the buildings and so on without the proper assessment that we'll get in future planning applications. But we do think it's it's a welcome aspiration in terms of the number of trees and the structure of that, and so that's noted and welcomed. Second key issue relates to access and car parking. And you can see on this aerial photograph, I think it's 2015, one of our own aerial photographs, that the site is heavily parked. This is ultimately an inefficient use of this site, and the plan, therefore, as I mentioned, is to cease the car parking on all that area and to actually re-provide that in a much more efficient form in the new car park, the multi-storey car park that's proposed. That makes sense, obviously, in efficiency and brownfield development densities and so on. So the applicant has submitted this plan and agreed that in order to make sure that the new development, the car park itself, is ultimately results in no net increase in vehicles parked at the site, and therefore, in vehicles coming and going to the site, that they will cease parking on this area when the new car park opens. This plan states that there's 575 spaces in this area, but we've reviewed some old aerial photographs, from a number of years, and we think that when you take into account this area here, which historically was used as car parking, there could well have been more than 600 spaces parked in this area, and therefore we don't raise any objection in terms of traffic generation, and we've proposed a condition to ensure that that area, car parking in that area, ceases when the new car park opens. My final slide then is the last concern relates to access to the car park, so the route that those vehicles will take and the impact that that could potentially have on the operation of the hospital site, and the ability of people to move freely on foot around that site. So both the Hospital Trust in their representation jointly with the Hospital Environment Group, who you're going to hear from shortly, and your officers, we agree that we want to minimise the number of additional vehicles that use this area here, which we call Hospital Drive, because ultimately heavy use of that by traffic will ultimately sever this new development from the hospital and make it more difficult for it to operate efficiently. It could also lead to pedestrian safety concerns. So the applicant has agreed that this alternative route to the car park will be promoted as the primary access to this new car park. And we propose, therefore, to attach conditions to ensure that this route is delivered before the car park opens, because that route isn't fully available at present. We also propose a condition to secure a package of measures to be agreed and implemented in collaboration with the Hospital Trust to ensure that people use that route. And if we go briefly back to the existing car park, you'll see on this plan, this is the route that the vehicles use to access this car parking area in any case. So ultimately, once this route's in place, the impacts, there'll be no additional impact ultimately in terms of those vehicle numbers. So a further planning application will be needed before that route can be delivered, but that route is actually included in the next planning application which we've received for the planned care centre, which is this one. So that's the main slides. Finally, you'll have noted at paragraph 25 of the report, I confirmed there would be an addendum report to update officers' position in respect of transport matters following a review of some final transport information. I can confirm to you that the final response from the Highway Authority doesn't require any additions to the report itself. It's just resulted in the need for minor changes to 2 of the transport-related conditions and to a related advice, and those changes are set out on your addendum report. There's also a minor change proposed to the condition that secures future connectivity of the scheme to a district heating network, which we consider important because there are opportunities in this area from the hospital for using waste heat. As I say, very minor changes, don't intend to talk about those in detail, but welcome questions if that would help. So I'll just conclude by confirming our recommendation is for approval as set out in the report, subject to the conditions and the section 106 that we recommend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. You'll notice, members, that we have 2 speakers on this particular application. First speaker is Mr. Robert Jeffrey, who is objecting to the scheme. Mr. Jeffrey, would you like to come forward and address the committee? Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Jeffrey. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. We normally remind you a minute before the expiration of that. Okay, is that okay?
Thank you very much.
In your own time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and everyone else. Well, good afternoon. My name is Robert Jeffrey. I'm representing the objectors to this application in its original form. We recognise the need for car parking and new healthcare facilities, and we welcome enhanced cycle and pedestrian routes to and within the hospital grounds and greater use of public transport. It is regrettable that some mature trees would be felled, but the planting scheme for the Northwest Quadrant as a whole contains many welcome features, and the copse between it and the hospital will be preserved. As chair of the Derriford Hospital Environment Group, I wrote a joint letter of objection together with Anne James, Chief Executive of Plymouth Hospitals NHS Trust, because of concerns about the increase in traffic through the Derriford Hospital site and the potential use of roads within the hospital grounds for traffic unconnected with the hospital business, particularly following the construction of the Forder Valley Link Road. In that letter, we urged that car access to both multi-storey car parks, that's the existing one and the new one, and other buildings and businesses, should be via access roads within the northwest quadrant and not via the hospital grounds. And that the road immediately north of both multi-storey car parks, referred to as Roscoff or Campus Lane, should be blocked off at its eastern end to prevent private cars using the hospital as a through route. Our formal objection is accurately described under representations in section 6 of the Planning Application Officer's report, and which Mr. Douglas has just described to you. In the analysis, section 8, part 18 of the report, Mr. Douglas described the plan to construct another access point from Derriford Road to the northwest corner of the northwest quadrant. You can see it on there, it's an extension of the horizontal red line, just there, that's it. Now, we urge this committee to make that a condition for the approval of the application. We are pleased that the developers, the council and the hospital trust have been working together to address these issues since the original application was filed. We welcome the redirection of cars away from Hospital Drive, that's between the copse of trees and the disabled car park, and the conditions 16 and 18 that the new multi-storey car park can only become operational when a new access road is built passing through the northwest quadrant. The report states that car access will be via an extension to Roscoff or Campus Lane with 2 inbound and 1 outbound lanes. We question the need to widen the eastern end of that lane, linking it with Hospital Drive. On the contrary, we'd like it blocked off altogether. Well, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to address you. The process of cooperation between the various stakeholders has been much more constructive than the adversarial approach used for the application to build a bus interchange in front of the hospital, which was approved without referral to this planning committee, despite 100 objections being lodged. And I hope that this cooperative process can continue for further applications concerning the development of the northwest quadrant. So in summary, we would support this scheme if the eastern end of Roscoff and Campus Lane immediately to the north of the multi-storey car parks was blocked off and the new access point from Derriford Road to the northwest corner of the site was constructed as additional conditions for approving the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jeffrey. Thank you. We now have Mr. Richard Brown, who is the agent supporting the application. Afternoon, Mr. Brown. As you would probably be aware, you have 5 minutes. You can sit or stand or whatever you feel comfortable.
Sit if it's all right. Thank you.
And you have 5 minutes. We'll remind you a minute before.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon,
Right.
everyone. My name is Richard Brown. I'm a Director in Town Planning at a company called CBRE. We act on behalf of the applicant, who you've heard is Aviva, and they're one of the largest property fund managers in Europe.
Mr. Brown, could you just pull your microphone down towards you a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, good. The proposals before you today are the result of many, many months of hard work, and this has included working with your officers up to and also following the submission of the planning application. The proposals have also been scrutinised by an independent design review panel called Creating Excellence. They appraised the proposals, and we have also considered carefully the panel's constructive feedback and made improvements to the scheme as a result. We've also undertaken extensive public consultation, and this showed very strong support for the proposals and also for the wider redevelopment of the brownfield land at the northwest quadrant in Derriford. Mr. Douglas already alluded to some of these points, but it is perhaps helpful just to explain at this stage the need for the current application. The proposals have been developed working alongside the Trust, who the development is proposed for. It is needed to help the hospital with its very pressing development needs and their ambitions to become a world-class centre of excellence. The proposed office building is necessary so that hospital staff can be relocated from the nearby Eagle One building. This building is no longer suitable for the Trust's needs, and also the Trust's lease on the building expires in 3 years' time. The proposed new 600-space multi-storey car park will allow existing poor quality surface level parking at the northwest quadrant to be moved into a modern and safe facility. It also means that the development will be parking and traffic neutral. Importantly as well, by freeing up other land at the northwest quadrant, the proposals are a necessary and important first step to allowing other future developments to also come forward. This will mean that our shared ambitions to create a new heart for Derriford can be realised. The northwest quadrant is key to supporting the growth of the hospital and also your aims for the area. The application fits very well with your emerging local plan and will deliver on a number of priorities such as the creation of very high quality buildings and spaces and also contribute towards creating the Seaton Arc. In terms of site constraints, as you've heard, the most significant issue is perhaps the rare Plymouth pear tree within the southern part of the site. Retaining this tree and ensuring enough space for it to flourish in the future has been an important design objective. As a direct and unfortunate consequence, however, certain other trees would need to be removed to allow the development to take place. Because of this, we have worked hard to make sure that the development will provide a significant amount of high-quality tree planting and landscaping, including a new ravine garden, to compensate for the trees needing to be removed. And as you've heard, our proposals are accepted by your tree officer. Also, we've developed a wider tree and landscape strategy for the rest of the northwest quadrant, and you've seen an extract from it today, to guide other future proposals. And we've also shared this, obviously, with your officers and also separately with the Hospital Environment Group. We've also listened carefully to the Hospital Environment Group as an important local stakeholder. For example, to address concerns about traffic causing congestion on certain estate roads around the hospital, we've agreed with your officer a routing strategy which will avoid this. In summary, the application before you is the result of a significant amount of work, and as part of this, we have listened to the views of many different stakeholders and evolved the scheme in a number of ways as a result. The development will create a number of important benefits for the area, not only for the growth of the hospital, but also for the delivery of your plans to create a new heart for the communities of North Plymouth. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Brown. Thank you. Right, now we're going to throw it open to the committee. Councillor Pengelly. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask Mr. Douglas about the Plymouth pear tree, because it says in the report on page 23, crucially, the Plymouth pear will be safeguarded, and it also goes on to say about the adequate space will be made for future growth. But I only know of one other place in Plymouth where this grows. I'm delighted to think there is another Plymouth pear in Plymouth, but I'm really concerned about how you are going to safeguard that tree. It's easy enough to give it a lot of space around, but is there anything else that's going to be done?
Well, the proposals to safeguard the tree are ultimately, they have been assessed, submitted in detail by the applicant's arboricultural consultant. You can see on the plan that's on the screen in front of you, the yellow area here is the root protection area, calculated in accordance with the relevant standards that's needed. So an area that you can't build within there. And they've actually chosen to build the building further away from the Plymouth pear than necessary in order to further protect it. So the council's tree officer is satisfied that the tree protection measures are adequate, subject to conditions which we have applied to get further, to ensure the delivery of those and get further details. And the council's tree officer and our natural infrastructure team are satisfied that those measures will be adequate to ensure the protection of that tree. I believe there are several examples of the Plymouth pear tree, but the applicant has been clear that there's a need to ensure the protection of that tree at all cost, and we consider the measures that they're putting in place are adequate to do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, if I may. I'm delighted that Mr. Jeffrey has come. We've had connections in the past with regards to the bus interchange, and there were a great deal of trees lost. So it's good that adequate planting has been safeguarded for the loss of the mature trees, which is always sad, but at least we've got some good landscaping to come. As ward councillor in Moorview, though, one of my major concerns is parking full stop and the impact that it has on neighbouring residents. Could you just clarify, with regards to the 575 or 600 spaces, is there any provision to have greater capacity to alleviate the pressure on the neighbouring streets, which is already really not coping? So whilst this is neutral, is there any reason why, with future developments which may incorporate more parking, that we're not taking the opportunity to almost future-proof the parking arrangements, please?
I'll let my colleague Scott Smye answer that, if that's okay, Scott.
Is it for members who you don't know, this is Scott Smye, our highways officer. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, we're picking up on the point Councillor Kelly's made. We do appreciate that there are sort of wider issues in terms of parking pressures in the Derriford area, which overspills from the hospital. Most of the parking that you see that's being provided to replace the existing car parking are those spaces which are actually allocated to staff in terms of permits, and they pay for that on a daily basis. I think it would be very difficult to it's almost like a predict and provide. It would be very difficult to provide further car parking for all of the staff, in view of the fact that the hospital does have its green travel plan, and we actively try to encourage as many staff as possible to use sustainable modes of transport, hence why the substantial infrastructure investment went in with the new public transport interchange. So it's about, for the Highway Authority, about striking a balance between providing enough operational spaces but also still encouraging the use of sustainable modes of transport, because there's always an issue that obviously providing more parking potentially encourages more trips, and that ultimately ends up on the highway network. So we feel that we've got the balance right at the moment.
Okay, Nick, did you want to follow up on that?
It's not a specific follow-up to that to the parking issue. It's more with regards to the objection that Mr. Jeffrey has brought forward. Could you just clarify why the alternative route, which I think is the main objection, is not particularly viable, or what considerations were looked into with regards to just altering that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have looked at alternative routes, as you've seen on the plan, and there are conditions to secure an alternative route to the obvious one, which would be an extension of the existing road from Hospital Drive past the front of the car park. The suggestion that was made in the representations about securing, I think in several representations, that there was a suggestion of securing a completely new alternative access to the site from either this area here or potentially through this building. But ultimately, this building is not, well, it wasn't absolutely clear, but it was from the western side. And with this use ceasing, there was a suggestion that we could get potential new access from this area. But clearly, none of this land in this location is within the applicant's control. There are also issues. Obviously, the Derriford Transport Scheme is being delivered as we speak, and as part of that, we did look some time ago at whether there might be possibility of getting an additional arm off the roundabout, but that wasn't possible. So to get an additional access in from here wasn't possible, and probably not proportionate also in terms of this application, given that it's not actually increasing the number of vehicle trips to and from the hospital. There is on the master plan, as we discussed. Sorry, which way do I need to go to get to the master plan? There is the possibility, although this hasn't yet been fully tested, but there is the possibility of a new access point here from Derriford Road in the future, and that was something that was part of the scheme that was considered as part of the public inquiry some years ago, the idea of having an access point here. But I think having sort of all movements in and out there is very problematic in terms of its impact of queuing cars on the junction. So We will continue to explore the possibility of bringing this access point forward as part of the master plan, which is why it's shown on the master plan. But as part of this scheme, ultimately the applicant hasn't yet demonstrated the acceptability of that, and we haven't explored that junction in great detail. The premise of this application is ultimately that you've got in the region of 600 cars coming into the site here, and at present they either come via Morley Drive up that way, or they come via Derriford Road and go in that way. And the conditions that we're proposing to promote and secure an alternative route to the hospital than this one are ultimately designed to sort of secure the status quo. And I think that's all that we think would be reasonable and proportionate in respect to the development that's before members today. I don't know if Scott wants to add anything else, but...
The only other thing I can add to that, Chair, is that we've actually put on a signing strategy condition, which will be relating to directing both staff and patients to the multi-storey car park. So we would be looking for that condition to actually highlight the use of the alternative route that John's mentioned, which would take some of the trips off, but at least with the two different sort of access points going in, because I know the concern was made about closing off the eastern end of Roscoff. I think there would be a transport concern if we were to access all of the multi-storey car parking from the route from the sort of access route that we've been talking about. You know, there would be potentially 1,200 spaces accessed off that one route. So the signing strategy will encourage at least some of the existing patients to use MS1 by using that primary access route. And by, like I say, but providing the two access points, it allows the traffic movements to be spread more evenly rather than sort of overloading one particular route to the detriment of another.
Yeah, okay, I think that's fairly well answered, those points. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Davey.
Parking. You say it's parking neutral, but I seem to remember, because I was making lots of trips last year to the hospital, that the current multi-storey is visitor parking. Am I right in thinking that? I mean, that's where we used to. Yeah. And that was invariably full, and the area that you were showing where there were 597, there was an actual, there's a block in there which is used as overflow pay per visit. And I'm just trying to... yes, that one there, as opposed to the lighter grey, which is what you're saying. Now, you're going to get rid of that car parking at the moment, which is used extensively by visitors, and I see nothing that kind of mitigates against that. I'm assuming that visitors are just going to be driving, as I found myself occasionally doing, driving around aimlessly, having dropped off an aged parent who was going to visit another aged parent, trying to find somewhere to park myself. And to take up Nick's point, having to drive off-site to try and find somewhere to park. And I'm just slightly worried that it isn't parking neutral. To me, it's actually detrimental to visitor car parking as it stands at the moment, with nothing going in place anywhere for the visitors that are going to be displaced from there.
John, would you like to answer that?
So the reason it's ultimately considered, to be parking neutral is that there is nowhere within that red line that's shown there that the applicant is offering to seize are members of the public permitted to park. Members of the public do park in this area here, but that doesn't benefit from planning permission for car parking. It is in use as car parking, but clearly the use of that area will be subject to debate in the next planning application when another health use proposes to build on that site. But as I say, this planning application won't change the the arrangements in respect to visitor parking at all, because visitors aren't permitted to park in the red line area that you see there. And similarly, this application doesn't propose any change to the use of the arrangements of existing car park 1. It is possible, obviously both car parks will be under the management of the hospital trust in future. We're attaching conditions to this car park to say that it can only be staff use, but the other car park, there is more flexibility. And if the trust were able to reduce their own staff parking requirements, it's possible that visitor parking in there could increase in future, but that would be a matter for the trust to resolve.
Okay, any further speakers on this particular application? In that case, we're going to move to the vote. Now, I want to be very clear about what we're doing. This is a recommendation to grant as per your agenda. When I signalled to the committee clerk to open the vote, you will have 20 seconds in total to cast your vote. That's for, against the recommendation, for or against, or abstention. Within that 20-second period, you can change your mind if you're a hesitant sort of person, or you're a bit confused. But after that 20-second has elapsed, your vote is irretrievably cast. Is everybody clear on that? What could possibly go wrong? Right. So, just to make it clear, when I indicate to the in a minute to the clerk that we are about to vote, you have 20 seconds and 20 seconds only. You can change your mind within that period by pressing the appropriate button. If you don't, that will be registered and is not reversible. Okay? Right, the recommendation is to grant. Ross? Oh, we're putting the vote, right. Right. All in favour, please vote. Right, okay, there you see the voting register in front of you. The recommendation has been granted or passed, and there are the appropriate councillors who have voted in their respective positions. Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the committee, for that. Yeah, it worked. Phew. Yeah, I'm sure the full council will go exactly like that, and it won't be any problems at all. Okay. Brings us on to item 7, which is planning applications decisions issued, pages 45 to 60. You have that been circulated. Does anybody wish to comment on any of those included? Yeah. Do we have to agree? Do we have to vote on that? No, we don't need. I'm sorry to disappoint members. You've only got one press of the button today, and that's it, I'm afraid. I know you want to do it again, but I'm sorry, it's not possible. So that's agreed, noted. Right. Thank you, Ted, for missing this historic vote that we've had. Yeah. Welcome, Councillor Fry. That brings us on. I will let Councillor Fry sit down for this last item. Yes. Peter, did you want to comment on 8? Yeah. Right.
Okay. Members, I'd just like to draw your attention to the appeal decisions. There's 3 appeal decisions outlined. The first appeal decision, which was Plumer Road, which was one which came to Planning Committee some months ago, and was subject to an informal hearing. Just to make the members aware, that appeal was allowed, so permission has been granted. A number of members actually attended the hearing, which we're very grateful for, and gave representations on behalf of the committee and also local residents. Interestingly, as I say, the appeal was allowed. Costs were claimed from both sides, which is fairly unusual. The applicant claimed costs against the council, and also the council claimed costs against the applicant. Also, rather unusually, both costs were allowed, so both sides received costs and effectively cancelled themselves out. So it hasn't cost the council any further money from the appeal, but it's a quite unusual appeal decision, and obviously because it was a member decision and a member overturn from officer recommendation, I'd just like to draw it to your attention. Thank you.
Okay, is that noted? Okay, right. That brings us to the end of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed, members.
Can I say, hopefully see as many of you as possible tomorrow at the annual training.
Annual training tomorrow for those. Sorry, Councillor Pickett.
Please ask Mr. Ford that those of us who cannot possibly come tomorrow, will we be able to catch up in a
Yeah, what I'll do is that those who can't attend, I'll arrange a separate briefing so I can summarise what